is take one of these thumbnails and go ahead and start detailing it a little bit, correcting the drawing, figuring out the design. So I'm going to do this first column, second image here. And I chose this one because I wanted to fix the composition. I think right now it's very open in the center, and the page is symmetrical from left to right because there's equal amounts of things on the left hand side as there are on the right hand side. So I'm going to fix this composition, and you can see that I'm starting to block in just some basic tones to establish where some ambient occlusion or shadow areas might be, areas that are really close together in terms of adjacent forms, or even just, the sky is creating that basic ambient light, and the shadows would occur regardless of if there was a strong light source or not. So I'm just blocking in some basic form using the ambient light and not focusing too much on rendering it, but thinking about the basic shapes and forms, just so that I can establish the overall design on the interior of the silhouette now. And what you can see me doing is trying to establish the right shape and proportion for some of those details to figure out what it actually is going to be. And I'm starting to think that this is going to be some kind of hangar bay where maybe the transport ships will exit. And as I'm starting to render this out, I'm trying to get it to match the perspective that I want so that it fits within this world. So at this stage, it's important to move beyond just the silhouette and start fixing some of the drawing. And around this point, I'm deciding that I need to add more of that hangar bay to the left-hand side so that it becomes my focal point. Right now, I've got that foreground cliff to the left and that hangar bay to the right, both equal in the composition, and I want to emphasize one over the other. So even if I have to sacrifice my composition that I initially started with, I want to think of that as a starting point. So all I'm doing now is copying and then pasting that over. I did a copy merge, and that's Shift Control or Shift Command C, and it's duplicating on top. It's going to grab everything as if it were flattened down, and then I just paste it right on top of it. And that creates another copy that I can work on. If you have this on a separate layer, or if you just wanted to lasso it out on that particular layer, that would be fine. But for me, it's just to create a little bit more volume and visual weight on that right hand side. And you'll see that I'm going to get rid of that left hand foreground component just so that it doesn't end up creating so much cramped space right there and some awkward tangents. And I'll start to use the lasso tool to carve out some straight edges. It's much faster than trying to paint a straight edge in Photoshop, especially if you don't have a Cintiq. And I also like that because it creates a selection that I can use to paint right up against, and it becomes very sharp and crisp, and especially useful for architectural types of shapes and forms. So now I'm starting to block in my rough perspective grid. It's not precise, but this is still a sketch, so I'm okay with just freehanding and estimating that perspective. Later on, when I start to clean it up, I'll do a tighter pass on this. But for now, it's just going to be a simple 2-point perspective, and that grid is going to be used to reestablish the drawing, correcting the proportion issues, correcting the perspective issues, figuring out the design. And I'm not so much worried about blending shapes or rendering form or even material indications. It's purely just adding details so that we can recognize some of the forms and the shapes on the interior of the silhouette. And this is just a simple hard round brush for the most part. There's nothing fancy about the brush. Again, this would be step 2 of my thumbnail process, but You could also just do this straight away without doing the other thumbnails. You could just do your preliminary block in like what we have, and then just go straight into adding a little bit more detail and refining it some more. I don't want to take it to the point where it's a finished sketch, but it's just enough to where I can show it to somebody, like say an art director or a team member, and ask them their opinion or get feedback on it. And there would be enough information on there so that they could recognize some of the forms and figure out what's going on. Sometimes those composition studies and simple block end shapes are very hard for people to tell what it would look like, and so I need to refine it just a little bit so that it helps them see what my vision is.